Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. Hi. Ready? Ready? Okay, good. We start? Very good. Hope everyone's doing well. I've had a nice long weekend. I tend to work harder on Labor Day, which is my way of sticking to the man. So, everyone, please meet Rebecca. She will be your Langdell for this semester. Rebecca got an A in my class last year. She knows it very well. She's also my research assistant. So I trust that you will work very closely with her. Go to her sessions, listen to what she has to say, because she will tell you how to do well in this class. People say, how do you do well in this class? Talk to her. I can only see you so many hours a week, although I wish more of you would come to my office hours. Hasn't happened yet, but I am available. But for those of you who have interest in attending the Langdells, Rebecca, take it away.
Okay, so Langdell starts this Saturday on the 13th. It's going to be from 12 to 1:30. It will be in this room. I'm just going to write my email up here real quickly in case y'all have any questions you want to send to me. But as Professor Blackman has stated, I do highly recommend attending these sessions because I've taken his exam. I know, or like to think I know what he's thinking.
She suffered greatly.
So either way, I have some test-taking strategies. We work on problems, and we closely follow his syllabus. So you are, constantly reinforcing the concepts that you're learning in class. Then you have less stuff to review at the end, and I'll also help you with, sort of structuring your exam studying month. I don't know, everyone does it differently, but I have some suggestions on that. So either way, I'm happy to see everyone on Saturday and look forward to having some very productive sessions.
Also, just so you know, there's a midterm in this class on October 6th. For those who've actually bothered to read the syllabus, but 3 weeks ahead, you'll see that you have a midterm. Basically, it's going to be a 90-minute in class. Actually, Rebecca will be proctoring it, so you have a familiar face. Do you know we're not allowed to be there when we proctor exams? It's the weirdest thing. The school's a policy. Like my first year teaching, I actually wanted to go to the class, wish everyone good luck, and the proctor's like, shoot me away. The reason why is actually fascinating because you're not supposed to ask us questions during the exam. And they're afraid that if I'm in the room, they'll start asking questions, which makes it unfair. So I can't even be in the room. So we'll simulate this. So Rebecca will be in the room for the exam. The midterm will be on October 6th. It'll be a 90-minute in-class exam. You'll get your exam numbers, exam soft, everything will be like full testing conditions, and you will be there. Okay. Questions?
Yeah.
Thank you, October 5th.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. The midterm's October 5th. Thank you. I was off by a
I was
day.
about to ask you that.
He's a teacher. He knows the stuff. Yeah.
And also, yesterday our Langdell said that any Langdells before 2 this Saturday were canceled. Because of intramurals or something like that?
Okay, they did not send that memo out to me, but we have a training tomorrow. So I can just send y'all an email and follow up and let you know so that you're not lost or confused. Okay?
She's got this. She's very good. Don't worry.
Well, I look forward to seeing everyone whenever we have our scheduled time. But I'll let y'all know.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay. Any other questions before we get started? Any questions on the executive power so far? In Youngstown, on Davidson Moore, on Noel Canning, on the recess power, the appointment power, anything in your minds? So one of the cool things about teaching ConLaw is that every semester my syllabus changes. Property, it's the same damn thing for 400 years, right? Property doesn't really much change. But this class changes significantly. I wasn't able to teach this decision last year because it hadn't been decided yet. This came out in June of 2015, so barely like 5 months old. That's why I gave you the printout version from Westlaw. It's so new, your book doesn't even have it yet. Also, one of the reasons why I gave you this decision in full, I know you're grimacing at you have to read 40 pages, but the reason why I gave this decision in full is because it puts on display, in my mind, one of the most difficult separation of powers decision in years. I can usually make up my mind in these sorts of cases. This case, I'm on the fence. I really, for poor Menachem over there, he didn't get what he wanted. I'm really on the fence in this case, and every time I read it, I go back and forth. And my hope for you reading all the opinions is to embrace why this is such a difficult and precarious case, to say the least, a sensitive topic in the geopolitical scheme. Okay? So any questions before we get started? Okay, this will be a good class, I promise. All right, where do we begin? Who was last up? Bridget, were you last up?
She went, and I did not.
Okay, so you're up. Yeah, in my afternoon class, someone said, "Oh no, I went. My neighbor's up next." she ran it. So I appreciate that you took the bullet and self-volunteered. So, what are the facts here? What's the dispute with poor little Menachem over here? What's the problem?
There was how do you say his name?
Menachem ben Yamin Zivotofsky. He's a little. It's actually very cute. He went to the Supreme Court twice, right? So in 2012, he had a case the first time. I'm sorry, 2011. And look at him over there, right? He was about 9 years old. And the first go around, the question was whether he had standing to sue the Secretary of State. We haven't talked much about standing, but that means, was he actually able to use the courts to adjudicate the separation of powers dispute? So in the first case, Zivotofsky uno, right? Zivotofsky won. The court said, yes, he can sue. This was mentioned. The second case was argued last fall, 2014. And you can see how much he's grown. And he's actually a bar mitzvah boy this year. So he's 13. He did not get what he wanted though for his bar mitzvah. It was not a satisfactory journey. So where was he born, Bridget? Where was Menachem born?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Where in the world is where is Jerusalem? Where's Jerusalem?
Israel?
Is it? I don't know. What does the United States government have to say? Hey, you work for the State Department. Where is Jerusalem?
I actually helped work on this case.
You did? Oh, good.
So
Mazel tov.
Jerusalem is a city-state, kind of like Vatican City.
Uh-huh.
And so it's its own entity.
According to whom?
That's according to themselves. So it's protected by Jordan and by Israel.
Okay. So what sovereign has control over Jerusalem, according to the United States government?
No one.
No one. Okay, so this may come as a surprise to anyone who's ever used a map, right? Although some maps maybe don't. But for all intents and purposes, Jerusalem is in the geographic boundaries of the country known as Israel. Okay, for all intents and purposes, Israel exercises almost complete jurisdiction over Jerusalem, with a few carve-outs here and there, which are somewhat jointly run. But for all intents and purposes, the country of Israel, the sovereignty of Israel, has full control over Jerusalem. Since 1948, the United States has recognized the state of Israel as an independent sovereign. It was formed after World War II. Britain ceded the land, and they basically made a country in the desert for the Jewish people. But since President Truman in 1948, the United States has not seen fit to make any statement concerning the city of Jerusalem. Aaron, why has the United States been hesitant since the last 60 years of making any statement about the sovereignty over Jerusalem?
Not interested in going into a religious war.
Okay, so to put it more mildly, they think it may impact U.S. interests, right? The United States has interests in the Middle East peace and the process that goes on forever and ever and ever. There's no end. It's just a process at this point, right? But they're trying to stay somewhat neutral in this process, and they're afraid by saying that Jerusalem is in Israel, they'd be picking sides in this conflict. Okay? I don't get diplomacy. I'd be a terrible diplomat because I don't care about these things. But to people at the State Department, they do matter quite a bit. So for the last 70 years or so, every president, Obama, Bush, Clinton, go all the way back, right? Reagan, Clinton, whoever. They've all taken the position that the city of Jerusalem is not in Israel. If you look at a map, it kind of looks like it's in Israel, but for purpose of the United States government, it's not. All right, so let's see. Andrea, what happens then? Oh, let's say you're born, I don't know, let's make an easy situation, right? Let's say you're born in Toronto, right? And you're a U.S. citizen, your parents are citizens, so you're a citizen at birth. What will your passport say for your place of birth if you're born in Toronto?
Well,
No, if you're born in Toronto.
oh, Toronto.
Not just Toronto, Canada, just say Canada, right? Usually the place of birth, unless you request something else, is the country in which you're born, right? So a more complicated one, let's say you were born in Moscow in the year 1970, right? What country were you born in?
Moscow.
Yeah. No, what was it called then? What was that thing called, that big thing there, the evil empire, right? No, it was not Russia. It was called the USSR, right? The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, right? Remember CCP, right? Remember when we beat them in hockey? So, everyone knows the CCP, right? So, in Russian, C, the character looks like a C is an S sound, so and the P is an R sound. So, you were born in the Soviet Union, that country no longer exists, so you can select to have Moscow, Russia, right? The United States has, in various respects, allowed people to modify their passports. Another one is Taiwan. Okay, Taiwan, Mr. State Department, is a very finicky place. Why is Taiwan such a touchy subject?
Because China claims that they have sovereignty over Taiwan. So
Well, that's more full than I thought it was.
The difference between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China.
Yes, right. So effectively, and this is going back a little bit of history, at one point, when Mao Zedong assumed power in China, a bunch of people fled to an island called Formosa, right? Which they said, we will now call this China. The entire mainland China was something else. So you had the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. By the way, when countries have words like people and republic and democratic, they're very tyrannical. Like the People's Republic of North Korea, okay, the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? It does actually say this. When countries have words like Democratic Republic, they're very statist, very tyrannical. So anyway, the People's Republic of China, not making any commentary there, I guess not, is it? So they say they're China. So then remember when Forrest Gump went to China with Nixon and remember playing ping pong, right? Shortly after that, the United States said, you know what, enough of this foolishness. We're going to call mainland China, China, and we'll call that Taiwan, but we will not kind of recognize this. It's this really delicate dance which diplomats are good at. But again, if you were born in Taiwan and you're a U.S. citizen, you can request your passport to say Taiwan, right? Not like a Republic of China. Let's just say Taiwan. And the other example is if you're born in Belfast in Northern Ireland. Technically, that's the UK, but people in Belfast don't really like that. So you can request Belfast. But poor Menachem over here, he was born in the Holy Land in Jerusalem. His mother went on his birth to the U.S. Embassy. Request was called a consular report of birth abroad, saying, hey, here's my son's birth certificate. He was born in a hospital in Jerusalem. He's a U.S. citizen by birth because of his parents. Please stamp in his passport. He was born in Israel. And they say no. The passport stamp says Jerusalem. Now, if you've been born in any other city, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Hebron, wherever, it'll say Israel, not a problem. But the fact that his hospital was in Jerusalem, right? That is the problem. And this has been going on for years. So Congress decided that they had to do something about this, that this is wrong, right? So Congress passed an act, okay? Section was a 214D, right? Michelle, what did is it 214 or 241? I always forget the number. 214, yeah. What did 214D? We'll just go with the statute. I don't feel like it's numbers for the rest of the class.
Okay.
What did the statute do?
Okay. Can I just summarize?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So what it stated that if a person could make a special request to the Secretary of State asking them to consider putting down Jerusalem, actually Israel versus Jerusalem.
Good.
So it had, and Congress enacted this, actually it was voted on in 2002.
Good.
Congress had, actually it was two parts. Part was the request to the Secretary of State, and the other one had to do with reports regarding
The consular, right?
consular reports.
We'll get to the consular reports when we get to Justice Thomas's dissent, which is really interesting. People have this hang up at Justice Thomas that, like, he's a Scalia clone. He's one of those original thinking justices of the court. I mean, that dissent was, that was him. That was original. And I have to just note, the New York Times had a hit on him that was very disingenuous. Had this entire piece out. Justice Thomas, the language, basically someone ran a plagiarism software on Supreme Court opinions. How similar is the opinion to briefs, right? And they say that Justice Thomas's briefs, opinions are very similar to the briefs, meaning copies and paste. He had the almost similar identical marks as Sotomayor and Ginsburg. It was this unfortunate knock on Thomas that because he doesn't ask questions, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Boulder Dash. If you read this opinion, he's got really vigorous original thoughts, and it drives me mad to know when people attack him. John Marshall never asked any questions either. That's oral arguments. Thomas says they're a waste of time. The briefs what matter. He's probably right. The arguments are mostly for grandstanding. I may play some clips later in the semester for you, but the oral arguments, it's about grandstanding and making a point, which is why cameras won't make much of a difference. But this law, as Michelle accurately stated, says If you're born in Jerusalem, you can make a request to the Secretary of the State to mark your passport as Israel, not Jerusalem. Okay? Now, did I call on you guys last time? I don't remember. Okay. So did I call on this row? Okay, so I'll do this two and jump over. I try not to repeat it, do my best. So Tam, this was in 2002, so who was president, right? Who was president in 2002? George Bush was president, right? So George Bush gets this statute, he gets this bill, and this bill says, hey, Bush, by the way, if people request, they have to ask your Secretary of State, it was Colin Powell at the time, that you have to mark a passport stamp as Israel. What were President Bush's options at that point? Or sign it, right? Remember we did Clinton v. City of New York, right? There are two options for a president. You can either veto it, or you can sign it. What did Bush do?
He signed it.
With, though, what? Ooh. He mentioned it. They mentioned it in the first page or two of the opinion. He definitely signed it, but he did something else. Darryl, you know?
He made a little caveat for him.
Caveat? Yeah, what the? What's this? Wait a minute. We said in Clinton v. City of New York, you have two options. You can sign it or you can veto it. What's this caveat business?
Well, he signed it, then he added a little, by the way, I'm signing this, but.
Yeah, okay, so what's the but? What's the but?
I don't agree with the fact that they can tell me what to do. It's an executive power because I have the right to receive ambassadors.
Okay, good. This is what's called, thank you, Darryl. This is what's called a signing statement. A signing statement. If you'd gone to law school during the Bush administration, which I did, the most egregious affront to our liberty was a signing statement. The American Bar Association made this entire big stink that George Bush would always sign these laws and issue a statement saying, oh yeah, but I'm not going to enforce this part. And I'm not going to enforce this part of the law. And I think that part's unconstitutional, so I'm not going to comply with that. And oh, by the way, you can't tell much about my passport because that's my duty, right? This was the most existential threat to the rule of law. You don't hear about it anymore. Obama does it all the time, enforces laws, signs statements, it doesn't matter, right? So the ABA, whatever. But this was considered a terrible thing because Bush did it quite often. He would say, this statute unduly interferes with my executive authority. Therefore, I will not treat this as binding. What? Right? Right? If this, he says, I'll quote it, if it's construed as mandatory rather than advisory, if it's construed as mandatory rather than advisory, this interferes with my powers. Okay. Tim, since when does Congress pass advisory statutes?
Not very often.
Especially when it says shall put in the passport?
Yeah.
Right. So what Bush is basically saying here is, this statute I think is unconstitutional. So generally speaking, what should a president do to an unconstitutional statute? Veto it.
Yeah.
Right. So here's the rub, my friends, right? If this law was in fact unconstitutional, Tim, why didn't the president just veto it?
I assume he agreed in part of the law.
Well, this was section 214, right? What about sections 1 through 213?
Right.
What about those?
Yeah, I think he agreed with those.
Right. So here's one of the messes, right? In modern law, you don't have bills with one sentence. You have bills that are 20,000 pages long. Can a president veto an entire massive spending bill and basically shut down the government over one provision that he disfavors? Well,
Can he? Sure.
yeah, I like that answer. Can he? Of course he can. Will he? Why not? Okay. So what's become an expedient, and Bush did it, Obama does it all the time, is saying, you know what? I'm going to sign the entire bill, but I'm going to treat this as like kind of like a suggestion rather than an actual law, right? Maybe I'll do it. Well, and it's not insane though, right? Because let's fast forward 8 years. Honestly, did the court find the statute was unconstitutional? It was unconstitutional. Was Bush right?
Yeah.
Does a okay? Let me ask this question to Michael. Does a president have a duty to enforce an unconstitutional law? Ooh. If the president knows the law is unconstitutional, does he have a duty to enforce it? Ooh. Ooh. What do you think, Michael?
He knows it's unconstitutional. He knows that because the court,
But the court hasn't ruled yet.
If
This
they
law
haven't
was in
made a
2002. The
ruling
court
on
didn't
it,
rule till
then-
2015.
then it's still a law that he should enforce.
Does the president, does an executive branch officer have an independent duty to judge a law's constitutionality?
I don't think so. That's what the Supreme Court is doing.
So unless Supreme Court rules, it doesn't matter? Ooh. What does the president take an oath to, Michael?
To uphold the laws.
Uphold what?
Well, the Constitution.
Yes! So does that imply the president has a duty to interpret the Constitution?
No.
Wrong!
Fine.
I am so glad you said that. He takes an oath to interpret the Constitution as he sees it. Where is it written in the Constitution the Supreme Court is the only say in the Constitution? Who said the Supreme Court gets the final say in the Constitution? Who said that? Michael? We read the first week of class. Yes! So the Supreme Court say that they're the first, last in the Constitution. Does that mean they're the only say?
No.
As every, and I'll make this point really clear, and if you learn nothing else, every person who takes an oath to the Constitution has a duty to uphold it as he sees it, right? Now, if the court says this is unconstitutional, it's probably a good idea to follow that. But until the court rules, right, this law is 2002. Supreme Court didn't rule until 2015. A decade, almost 13 years elapsed. Every time the president has a decision, he has to say, is this constitutional? That's why the president has lawyers. That's why he has a Justice Department, right? That's why he has a team of attorneys who advise him. Now, do they do a good job? Well, we can discuss another point. But in the abstract, every president has a duty to faithfully execute the laws. He has a duty to uphold the Constitution, which he takes an oath on. Right? Yes, sir.
I thought Bush was a little more pro-Israel, so why do you have a problem with the residents of Israel?
Oh, ain't that the thing, right? Because the State Department becomes apolitical to a certain extent, right? And I don't mean this in a partisan sense, but diplomacy doesn't fall within the normal realm of politics. And Aaron maybe can speak to this, but this position held when Truman was president, when Reagan was president, when Carter was president, when Bush was president. I mean, maybe President Ted Cruz would reverse it, but for all intents and purposes, this is probably not changing. State Department stuff is pretty consistent, right? Usually you don't change foreign policy depending who's in charge. But it's a good point here, right? What makes this case so unique is that usually when the president sets a foreign policy, Congress goes along. What was unique about this law is Congress was giving its middle finger to the president, saying, you know what? You've been ignoring the state of Israel for this long. We're going to do something about it. And that's why you don't see very often disputes over foreign recognition, which is one of the issues in this case. Okay, so we'll try this again. So Pamela, let's ask this question. So the president, right, has a duty to decide if the law is constitutional, right, on his own merit. Did Bush think this law is unconstitutional? Yeah, he said it. He wrote it in a statement. So why did he sign it?
Because of the other section.
Okay, exactly. Right. Because all these other sections, right? So should that matter, Pamela, that a president signs a law they think is unconstitutional?
Because if you really feel about something unconstitutional, you can't just say, oh, I think it's unconstitutional, but I'll still let this pass.
So, and then let me ask you the other question. I think it's a good response. There's a question I asked to Michael. Does a president have a duty to enforce a law that he thinks is unconstitutional? Court hasn't ruled on yet. No court's ruled. The president has a law, the previous president signed it. Hasn't been enforced yet. Does he have a duty to enforce it? Why not?
Because it's his duty to uphold.
Yeah, I'll give you a very good early example. So, remember we sort of discussed the Alien and Sedition Act. Okay, so during the early years of our republic, a very, very bad law was passed. That's called the Alien and Sedition Act. And the purpose basically was to lock up in jail anyone who speaks ill of the government. Can you imagine, in the United States of America, if you spoke out against the U.S. government, you were thrown in jail? Could this law possibly be consistent with the First Amendment? Did the courts uphold it? Yeah. John Marshall actually upheld a prosecution under it. And I'll talk about that part, okay? President Jefferson came into office. The Supreme Court had already upheld it. What did Jefferson do? You think he enforced it? No. He actually enforced, he didn't enforce it, he pardoned everyone convicted under it. He said this law is unconstitutional. So from the earliest days, we've had executives saying, I will not enforce an unconstitutional law, even if the court said it was constitutional, because of my independent oath to the Constitution. Don't second guess the oath of the Constitution. That means something, or at least perhaps it should. In any event, so President Bush signed this. It wasn't vetoed. It went into effect. Okay. And then poor little Menachem was born after this law into effect. I think he was born short. I mean, he was born in 2002. So it must have been like right after this law into effect. He had his bris, right? This was very quick. So the law goes into effect. His mom goes to the consular office in Jerusalem. By the way, there's no Israeli, the American embassy is not in Jerusalem, it's in Tel Aviv. Just as evidence, we don't even keep an embassy there, right? Because it's so iffy. We have an embassy in Havana, we don't have an embassy in Jerusalem. Yeah. There's a consular office, not an embassy. The embassy's in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, it's just like they're ran by the embassy.
What's called a mission, I forget the official term.
They call them consular office.
Yeah, it's basically like a satellite office, if you will. But it is not a full-on embassy. The embassy is in Tel Aviv. It's like a fortress. It's huge, with good reason. So Menachem goes, requests it, and he sues. And as I said, this case goes up to the Supreme Court first time in 2012. Can he sue? Right? Can an individual sue the Secretary of State to request this? And the court said yes, he can. They didn't reach the merits. Came back up a second time, and this case was argued last fall. As it was being argued, I can't remember the exact details, but there was some tumult in Israel where people were shooting at each other. There was something going on. I can't remember the details, right? And I remember during arguments, I think it was Justice Kagan actually made a reference saying, like, well, stuff's going on here. So before we get too far into the merits, I want to talk about this idea of a heckler's veto. Joseph, Chief Justice Roberts, in his dissent, mentions the idea of a heckler's veto. What is this? Oh, in a dissent, I don't have the page number, I'm sorry. But it's well, do you know what a heckler's veto is? All right, I'll come back to you. Ansel, do you remember what the heckler's veto is?
Heckler's veto, I know there's something. Free speech thing.
Good.
I had it. I know it's a free speech.
Okay, you're on the right track.
Okay.
Daryl, what's a heckler's veto?
It's where one person or small group can outshout everybody else, and they kind of win just by that.
Okay, anyone else? So a heckler's veto, and I'll give you an example. It's actually a recent constitutional law case that happened in California. So it goes like this. On Cinco de Mayo, in a high school in California, a student walks in wearing an American flag T-shirt. He's trying to make a point, right? You know, Cinco de Mayo is a Mexican holiday. I'm wearing an American flag T-shirt. All these kids start beating him up, right? And basically causes a tumult in the classroom because he's wearing the American flag shirt on Cinco de Mayo. Okay, the school instructs the student, you can't wear that American flag shirt. Okay. He's not the one causing the tumult. It's the people beating him up or causing this tumult, right? And basically, he was suspended for not taking the shirt off because he was causing the disruption, even though the other people were making the mess. The court actually upheld that suspension, right? Suspensions go to the courts, saying that he was causing disruption, right? This is a heckler's veto. The people who are doing the bad thing can silence the person, right? Their heckler can shut down the person who's actually engaging in speech. So this isn't exactly a free speech dynamic, right? But what, go back to Joseph, how does this dynamic play here? What was the Chief Justice referring to here? Exactly right. So follow me here. Follow me here for a moment. What the Supreme Court, what the government said to the Supreme Court was, if we stamp Israel on this passport, right? If we stamp Israel as the country of birth, there will be people who will perceive this as if we're endorsing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, right? And there may be unrest. There's actually an article cited in the first page or two, and if you read the title of the Washington Post, it's like throwing rocks. Remember the headline? The idea is this, right? If this stamp is passport, if this passport has a stamp in it, people overseas will perceive this as something it's not. And because of that, that's dangerous. And therefore, we cannot stamp this because it will cause unrest overseas. Yes, sir.
For
just don't understand why, like, Israel and Palestine too, like, our opinion, our recognition of them, really, like, we don't care if someone didn't recognize Houston as like a city in the U.S. They said it was a Mexican.
Well, you're entirely wrong. There was a debate with Andrew Jackson with the recognition of Texas, wasn't there? Yeah. So let me answer your question, though, right? This was actually in the decision. When this statute was passed in 2002, apparently, there were riots in the streets. So-called the proverbial Arab street, which you may have heard of. The proverbial Arab street arose. And they said there was unrest in the Middle East because the statute was passed. Not even that the stamp in the passport was made, the fact that the statute was passed. And the fear was this would cause unrest in the Middle East. Everyone understand? So the other Heckler's veto is, the Chief Justice said, because people may object to what we're doing, we have to rule in a certain way, like the kid who won the American flag shirt.
But isn't that really like a red herring? I mean, isn't really the essence of this is the president being able to recognize them?
Well, that's the issue, right? But I want to, before we go too far into it, you're actually up next, Ansel. What's the significance then to the Supreme Court if their decision could have the impact of screwing up the Middle East peace process?
It could make them. Oh, sorry, that's a real question.
I'm asking. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it could clearly, if the Supreme Court's decision could somehow influence policy, it would give them a much larger say-so in that, even if it was tacit, their decision could change, or impinge on the presidential powers. So if they make the decision,
okay,
it changes the rules.
So like, look, we've had this discussion before, right? You're President Truman, right? You go to the Supreme Court and say, if you rule against me, and we can't make steel, people will die.
Correct.
And what did the Supreme Court say to that?
You can't do that.
All right. In this case, though, the Solicitor General came and said, if you do this, this will screw up our peace process. Did that impact the decision?
No, I mean, the decision was the president.
No. Did it?
It did.
How?
Well, they really, what their thought was is that by saying that the president had to do this, what you were saying is his acknowledgement that Israel cannot be the birthplace, was saying that it doesn't matter, President, what you think is a sovereign nation or not. We're determining it. You do not have exclusivity. You do not have control.
Oh, no, you're right. But the point is, this was lurking in the background. And the court actually cited an article saying when this happened in 2002, there was unrest. This is as close as the court gets to saying, we don't want to screw around with the Middle East peace process, right? Because had the court, this was 5-4, right? This was 5-4. Had this gone the other way, what if the U.S. Embassy went up in flames, right? What if Benghazi, right? What if we had, what if something like that happened, right? Go.
I can add a little to this because I've actually been there. I'm originally from there as well. Yeah, it would stir up a lot of trouble because this city is half up the Palestinian territory and Israeli. So I would understand when someone would be gone. But again, it depends which side you were born on.
Well, in any event, it would upset the status quo, right? And that's what this foreign policy with the United States is. Let's keep things as they are. Let's keep things as they've been since 1948. Let's not pick one side or the other. And let's hopefully, let the process indefinitely go. Yeah. So everyone got that part right. So that was lurking in the background. I don't want to dwell too much on this. I actually made a joke to a friend last year that they should have dropped this opinion when Bibi Netanyahu was addressing Congress just to really screw with the president. But that didn't work out. By the way, interesting question: Can Congress invite a foreign head of state to speak when the president has not invited him? All this business about receiving ambassadors, right? It's actually a very close question. I looked at it at great length, but a foreign head of state is not an ambassador, right? But this was also the first time ever where a body of Congress invited a head of state who the president did not agree with, because the president did not invite Netanyahu to address Congress last year.
Clearly they can. They're in charge of their own rules.
Well, they did, but the question is, could they?
Well, they did. By definition, they could.
No. You're saying they did it because they had the power because they did it.
Yes.
Just because you do something doesn't mean it's constitutional, right? And I want to beat this into your heads. The mere fact that a court can't review it doesn't mean it's unconstitutional. Maybe Congress violated the Constitution, but no court will review it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm tracking. I want to make sure. Hecklers Veto. So we've got the Middle East peace process, and they're concerned about anything that's gonna impact what's going on in the
Anything,
Middle East,
yeah.
right? And so the idea is the Hecklers veto is that they don't, well, that's it, they don't wanna do anything that'll disrupt.
Yeah, so even if it's lawful, like use example, wearing an American flag is perfectly lawful, but because of the circumstances of Cinco de Mayo, people having unrest, you can't do that. So even if the Constitution says Congress can pass a statute, the president maybe can't enforce it because we're screwing things up over there. Yes, sir.
So you don't think that they were also worried about by doing this, it's being inferred. I think I read where it said now we're inferring, or someone can infer that this is now a sovereign country, and then there are certain rules and certain benefits that sovereign nations have.
Okay, that goes to recognition, and we'll talk about that at length. But I just want to talk about the Hecklers veto for a moment. But yes, so let's go into recognition, okay? Or is it okay? Let's go back up top. Ariel, what does it mean to recognize a foreign country?
It has its own that we can do commerce with it, you can do treaties and
Okay, good. Okay, so you said a lot of things that are correct. So recognition is a very official act, okay? When you recognize a foreign country, you establish that it has a place in the world. It's a country that you will do business with. It's a country that you will make treaties with. It is a country whom you will send ambassadors to and receive ambassadors from. That's a two-way street, right? When you send an ambassador away, you send them back. Okay. If the United States doesn't recognize a country, Americans can't do business with them. The entire deal with Iran about sanctions is U.S. saying we will not let American businesses transact business with the country of Iran, even though it's recognized partially. Yes, sir.
And is it the key of recognition that you're recognizing that nation's sovereignty?
Oh, good. What's sovereignty? Good. I was gonna get to that next. What's sovereignty?
The independence or freedom from influence and
Good.
pressures from outside countries.
And you're not just recognizing the territorial, like the borders, right? You're recognizing the government in charge. The government in charge. So one of the first exercises of recognition in our country's history was after independence, right? One day, we're part of Great Britain. And then the next day, on July 4th, we signed this thing called Declaration of Independence. And if you remember, Jefferson said, we are now these independent United States of America. We are an independent nation that can transact commerce and make treaties. Did Great Britain recognize us as a sovereign nation? No, because they thought we were rebellion. The same way which Lincoln thought the southern states were rebellion, the King of England thought we were just a bunch of rebels, and we had to get chopped back into submission. But one of the first most important acts of George Washington administration was relations with France. And this is discussed in a number of spots. There's actually a video from John Adams, I'm not going to play it today, but where John Adams meets King Louis. And we make relations with the French. And France sent an ambassador to the United States. And we sent a minister to France. And by establishing those relations, you basically allow commerce, you allow treaties, you allow people to move freely, right? So the act of recognition is very significant because it opens your country up to a new market overseas. Right? So usually, recognition is an easy task, right? Whatever government is in charge, you recognize them. But Sandra, what happens if it's unclear who's in charge, right? So let's use France as an example. They had a revolution, and the revolutionary forces overthrew the king. The guillotine swung, the blood was spilled, right? You're George Washington. Who do you decide is the lawful government of France? The king who was deposed, or these Jacobins, these rebels? How do you make a decision? He's George Washington. There's no precedent. He's number one, right? Which is what George Washington was so important for so many reasons, but nothing else. He set the precedent. Do you notice how often we read what did George Washington do? Because he was the first. So, Sandra, you're the Secretary of State. You're Thomas Jefferson advising George Washington. You guys know president. You're just like 5 minutes old, right? What do? Do you recognize the king who had funded your war? Remember the king had gave all this money during the war? You recognize his jacket and chopped all these heads off, and with Robespierre and these other crazy people. Oh, but what did Washington do though? Ah, you recognize who? The rebels, the Jacobins, right? Did anyone, Sandra, did anyone in Congress say, hey, why didn't you ask us our opinion?
I believe they didn't think about it.
Yeah, did Washington consult with Congress first when we did that? No. So we have this practice, right, where basically the president decided which ambassadors to receive and which sovereign to recognize. He basically said, hey, king, you had a nice run. I'm going to recognize the rebels, the Jacobins. By the way, Thomas Jefferson was a huge Francophile, so this wasn't a surprising move. He loved the French, liberty, fraternity, and brotherhood, right? All this garbage. So whatever, it didn't work out. Napoleon came over. Anyway. So, right, the idea of recognition is very significant. Even if there's a country with two disputes, so to use a rough example, over Jerusalem, there's claims from the Israelis and claims from Palestinians, right? By choosing one government over the other, the same way they chose King Louis over the French rebels, you are endorsing one of the states. You are endorsing one. So it's not just a mere act of, bragging, oh, look, there's Jerusalem. It's you're picking which government you want to be in charge. I mean, can you imagine if we had endorsed the rebels in France and the king came back? Well, I guess his head cut off, but the throne, right? The throne reemerged, right? Which happens. We'd be out of luck because we picked the loser. So you always have to have the right thing. I'm also in America, with Latin America, with Simon Bolivar and a lot of the revolutions. There was a legitimate dispute: is Spain in control, or are these independent sovereigns? And there were legitimate debates in the government over, do you recognize the government of Argentina? Do we still with Spain? There are these disputes. Even in Texas, which I hope all of you paid special attention to, as I'm sure you all learned in kindergarten, this is Texas. In 1835, everyone see that someone carved the name into the Alamo? Oh my God! I am glad he didn't have a posse lynch him. I was actually, I'm not joking. Like, a guy took a penknife and was carving his name into the Alamo. Yeah, I'm glad the cops got to him first. I'm curious what his sentence is going to be because he made the mistake of fleeing after they caught him. The guard said, "What are you doing?" And the guy ran away. The worst thing to do is flee the police. That's a violent offense, right? Once you flee the police, that's what makes your sentence serious. So anyway, in 1835, right, Texas declared its independence and declared its sovereignty as an independent nation, right? Did the United States have to recognize them? Well, President Jackson, you know the history, right? You want to know the history here? Oh, come on, Texas. I'm from New York. I know this. Come on, this is embarrassing. Come on, you let this carpetbagger? Yeah, go for it.
Jackson.
Thank you.
Was unsure about whether or not to recognize Texas.
Yeah.
He was being pressured by Congress.
Yeah.
So he sort of recognized Texas on the congressional floor.
Yeah. Okay. So again, President Jackson was great. Yeah, I don't want to go to war with Mexico because they were still a strong power at that point, right? Before we emasculated them. So anyway, there was a fear, right? So what happened? Jackson said, but Congress said, go for it, and they recognized Texas. So there's been always, though, this sense that, is this an exclusive power? Can the president make the recognition decision by himself? Or is this a power that is shared? Okay? That's the question that this case presents. If the president alone has the power of a recognition, and if this passport stamp amounts to a recognition, the statute's unconstitutional. But if the statute is not recognition, which is what the dissent said, the law is constitutional. Or if the power is shared, which is what Chief Justice Roberts basically said, then the law's fine. So the opinions here take many different perspectives. So the majority opinion by Justice Kennedy for 5-4 court says this power is exclusive. This is an exclusive power that the president does not share. Chief Justice Roberts dissented and said, don't be so sure, right? There's a history of basically Congress sharing this power. Don't be so quick. Justice Scalia, in his dissent, said, you guys got faked out. He loves doing this, right? You guys got faked out. This isn't a recognition. This is a travel document, right? It's like a AAA guidebook. You know the little passport you stamp, you know, when you're a kid, when you go to different states? Hey, this is like no big deal, right? What's the point? Justice Thomas basically says, Congress does not have the power to pass this law. They have no power over passports. It's a purely executive matter. So you see here from four or five, I can't count, whatever it is, majority, 4 opinions, very different views. So let's start with Justice Kennedy's majority opinion, okay? Justice Kennedy leads off, like in the first page, with Youngstown. Everyone knows that, right? Like the first page, like, I don't know what to do. Let's see what Jackson would do. Okay? So, Maria. Right? Yeah. In terms of Justice Jackson's brief here, right? Where do we find ourselves in this case? Yeah, we're at the lowest ebb. We're in the 3rd tier. Why are we in the 3rd tier? Why are we in the lowest ebb? Remind me a second, what does it take to get to the 3rd tier of Youngstown? What must the facts be? Exactly. Why is that the case here? Yeah. What proof do we have the president and Congress do not agree on this issue?
Well, the president wanted to recognize. Didn't want to recognize Israel and Congress did.
Yeah. So this is such a clear case of Zone 3. It's not even in dispute. And the parties agreed Zone 3. Look, Congress passed a statute saying, recognize Israel, you idiot. Do it already, right? Put the passport stamp saying Israel. George Bush issued a signing statement saying, not going to do it. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. This is a categorical case of Zone 3. I mean, it's very rare that you have such a complete clash between the president and Congress, right? And in matters of Israel, it seems to be the norm, but there's a serious clash at this point, right? So we're in Zone 3, right? So Adriana, as Justice Jackson taught us, nearly 70 years ago, when we're in the lowest tier, right, how should the courts inspect the president's actions? Yes. Oh, beautiful. The exact word I was looking for. Thank you so much. It must be scrutinized with caution. What does that mean? Okay, perfect. Okay. When the president is at his lowest ebb, right, meaning Congress has not given him anything, the courts scrutinize it with extra caution, look at it very closely. And when Congress has not given him powers, as Adriana said correctly a moment ago, all the president has, all that he has are his own constitutional powers. That is, the powers given to him from the Constitution. Right? Because usually the president acts on 2 fronts. He has the statutory power and the constitutional power. Here the president has no statutory power at all. Everyone understand that? So Jessica, if the president has no statutory power, what must he rely on? Yes. And what power in the Constitution allows the president to recognize foreign nations? Is it the recognition clause? Is there a recognition clause in the Constitution? Is there a recognition? Is there a recognition clause in the Constitution? Really, show it to me. I'm asking, is there a clause in the Constitution saying the president can recognize foreign nations? Thank you. Exactly right. There is no recognition clause, and this is something the court recognizes, no pun intended, on like the very second or third page of the opinion, okay? There is nothing in the Constitution speaking to the recognition. So we all agree there's no statutory authority. The president must derive this power from the Constitution itself. Okay? And as Jessica said a minute ago correctly, there is no clause in the Constitution, in the text, saying the president can recognize foreign nations. Okay? So what is the framework, right? Debbie, what is the approach we use? And what is the approach the courts have used to understand executive power when the text ain't clear? Where do we start always? Where should we start at least as lawyers? Yeah.
Executive power is Article 2, right?
Good. Okay, Article 2. Where in Article 2 should we look? Where should we look in the text?
Well, it's not the take care clause.
What clause does a court spend most of their time talking about in this case?
Reception?
Yeah, what's the reception clause? I'll give you that.
They talked about the reception clause, and that it didn't receive a lot of attention.
Good.
In the debate.
So what does the reception clause say? Just read up here. You can read it. Article 2, Section 3.
Oh, sorry. It says it should receive ambassadors and other public mentions.
Thank you, Debbie. Yes. Always look up when uncertain. I usually try to put the relevant text up here. I loathe PowerPoint, but I prefer a simple, clear text document that I can edit in real time. So yeah, so thank you, Debbie. So the reception clause is the president shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. Debbie, is that a power that's shared by the executive,
Well, that's
or it's exclusive?
That's under the Constitution, that's part of the debate, but they think, the court says it's exclusive.
Does the text tell you one way or the other? Does it say that it's shared, though?
It doesn't say.
So contrast it with Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Read this one, please.
President, by and with the advice and consent of
Oh.
the Senate,
Yeah,
to make treaties.
good.
Right, provided-
So can the president make a treaty by himself?
No.
Can the president appoint an ambassador by himself?
Yes.
Appoint an ambassador.
No, he has to have that confirmed.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I didn't scroll down enough, right? I was in class today. I was pointing. So I said, could you highlight what you're talking about? Millennials, right? You asked me to highlight it, right? So I didn't scroll enough. My apologies. You need the Senate's consent to appoint an ambassador. And you need the Senate's consent for treaties. But the reception clause, does it say anything one way or the other? So here we have a classic case, right? The Constitution is silent on recognition. It doesn't really say one way or the other about the reception clause. Mildred, how should we read it when the Constitution puts a joint responsibility for some, and for others it's silent? How should we read it? In other words, for appointing ambassadors and making treaties, you have to involve Congress.
Right.
But for the reception, it says nothing.
And I would read it that it's not.
That's probably the better way of doing it, right? Just a matter of text. If it says here to share it and there it's silent, it probably means it's an exclusive power, right? But then we look not just at text, right, but to practice. And Debbie said that the history, there's not much written about it. But as a matter of practice, Kathy, has the president involved the Congress in recognition? He has. Did he demand their approval?
Oh, in this case?
No, in the history,
No, he didn't demand it. He actually denied it.
Ah. Always or not always?
Not always. He sought the approval of Congress.
Okay, oh, at times, good. Thank you. So what we have here, and the court acknowledges, and Justice Scalia beats them over the head with it, is the history is conflicted, right? Some presidents have basically done whatever they wanted with recognizing foreign countries. Others have listened to Congress. Kathy, what do we do when the text is ambiguous and the practice cuts both ways? The text is ambiguous, the history is ambiguous, the practice is ambiguous. What do you do? Well, no. What? Let me ask this question. You've had enough. Okay, I'll move on. But thank you. No. You answered correctly. Jennifer. What's the court to do, Jennifer, when the text doesn't give you an answer? The history, the framing, they didn't talk about this much. The practice, what the executives have done, a little bit here, a little bit there. What the heck is a court supposed to do with this case?
Consider other factors that could be
Ooh, good. What are these other factors?
foreign policy.
Okay. What do you mean foreign policy? It's good. Good start.
Well, not the Hecklers thing that you mentioned, but some could, how it would affect people or how it would be perceived, what it would do to foreign policy. Like,
Well, let me ask you this, right? Whose perspective on foreign policy did the court adopt here? The president's or the Congress's?
President.
Why did the court side with the president over Congress? Aren't these co-equal branches of government?
They are.
I'm waiting for the but.
But
There it is. Thank you.
but I think the president, in the cases we've studied, he's starting to gain, the office is starting to gain more weight.
Ooh, good. All right, so I'll move on. Brian, why does the court seem more comfortable in picking the president's foreign policy over Congress's?
They like the president's interests align closer to.
But why does the President Trump, right? Oh God, I said President Trump. Why does that was not deliberate, like Freudian slip, right? Why does the president's priorities prevail? This is actually Justice Scalia and Thomas had a big debate over this exact point, right? Why do they go to the president instead?
Yeah, the sense it should have been equal. I guess
Yeah, good. Why does the dissent say that the branches should be equal? Aren't these equal and separate branches of government?
they are, but I guess there's always that absolute power that the president has.
What did our framers say about absolute tyranny, right? Kevin, what did the framers say about absolute tyranny? How do we define absolute tyranny?
The president having all the
Yes.
he can do what he wants.
The union of the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. When the executive, the legislative, and judicial are in one figure, it is a definition of absolute tyranny. Federalist was it 47? Remember the number. It was 47. If you're wrong. Right? Check that. Right? So we don't like those. I like you said absolute, but Kevin, how can our Constitution countenance such an absolute figure in this realm? Why? I mean, the majority goes with it. The majority goes, you know, and the tie goes to the president. Why do we do that here?
We want to, to the rest of the world, we want to show that, report that one.
Where do we get that in the Constitution? Where do we get this in the Constitution that we have to favor what we want to show the world? Where is that in the Constitution?
I believe that the majority takes it from Section 3.
Okay.
With his receiving of ambassadors. But
Right.
also, I mean, they kind of take all the sections together a little bit. They combine everything to say that because he has the power to appoint ambassadors, because his primary function is to deal with foreign affairs. They take it from the previous case, I can't remember the name right now, but the president is the sole organ or sole voice.
I'll get to the sole organ in a minute. So let me stop you there for a second, right? So you said the president, all of these powers over foreign affairs, right? Doesn't Congress?
Congress
So
also has
Article 1, Section 8, right? I think there are about 8 distinct things that Congress has. They can regulate commerce with foreign nations. They can establish rule of currency. I'm sorry, rule of naturalization. They can define piracies and laws of nations. They can declare war. They can grant these letters of marque and reprisal, these pirate letters. They can make regulations for the naval forces. Right, Marco? Is Congress lacking in their authority over foreign affairs?
Right, Congress, their rights are enumerated, right?
Ah. And what about the president? And appointing ambassadors, you know, receiving other things. They're enumerated too, aren't they?
I don't know where it's at. The court makes a distinction, right? That it's not. It basically said that the recognition power is supported by Article 2.
Marco, you said something very, very, very correct. You said that Congress's powers are enumerated. What about the president's? Are they enumerated?
The executive power shall be vested in
Ah.
the President of the United States.
What is the executive power, right? Walter, right here. You read it. What does that mean? The executive power shall be vested. What does that mean, the executive power?
It's like a power, sole power to the president.
This is called the vesting clause, right here, Article 1, section, or Article 2, Section 1, right? How does Justice Thomas read the vesting clause? How do you think he reads it based on his dissent?
It seems like he's trying to say that the executive power.
I'll give you a hint. Justice Thomas refers to this as the residual powers. Residual powers. What does that mean, the residual powers?
I don't know.
Steve, want to try it? What's that mean, residual powers? Yeah. So what happens? Yeah, want to go for it?
Well, I was just going to say, just because it's not specifically given to the Congress, and because it's not specifically given to the president, those things that are left over, those things that are residual, are given to the president.
Yeah. Steve? I'm sorry, Caleb? Yeah.
I actually had a question about this when I was reading it.
Please.
which is, doesn't Thomas's interpretation of that, I mean, really overbroaden the powers of the president
Yes.
in a lot of ways? Yeah, I feel like that's like a very poor or weak interpretation of the vesting clause. I mean, it looks
So,
like it's just
okay, so
a huge amount of
let
power.
me explain the vesting clause for a minute. So here's how Justice Thomas reads it, right? He says, Congress has all these enumerated powers to regulate commerce, to punish the pirates, Jack Sparrow, right? All this good stuff, right? But what about everything else that's not listed, such as recognition? And we said there's no power of recognition in the Constitution. What Thomas, and this is Thomas alone, no one else said this, what Thomas alone said is anything that's not listed is reserved to the president. The same way with the 10th Amendment, right? All powers not given to Congress are reserved to the states. By the same token, any power that Congress doesn't get goes to the president.
But also, Congress can take power a little bit of those residual, as long as they're creating laws that give them the power to do that.
They didn't do that in this case, though.
Right.
That's exactly what they did. They passed a law. What did the court say? Was the law constitutional?
No.
No. So,
But they have to be within the framework of the Constitution.
so the majority went with Youngstown. Thomas didn't cite Youngstown at all. Thomas said the vesting clause means the president gets to do what he wants, unless it's enumerated otherwise. Mark?
So with residual powers, would that kind of sort of go along with necessary and proper?
It's even broader, right? This is what Scalia says. We'll get to Scalia in a little bit, but Scalia says, you've basically substituted George Washington for King George III, right? It wasn't that a killer line? Thomas came back, well, you substituted Parliament for Congress. I love Thomas, but he doesn't have really the punch of Scalia. It's hard. No one zings like, those are, and Thomas wrote that in response to Scalia, of course. It's like, I know you are, but what am I, right? That kind of thing. But Thomas basically, yes, has an extremely broad power. I mean, we didn't read the Guantanamo cases, but Thomas basically says, and I'm not exaggerating, he probably thinks Korematsu is correct. I don't say that lightly, but if you read his opinions, I don't think that he thinks that Korematsu is wrong. Thomas. He thinks the executive has extremely broad powers.
Just when you bring up the Thomas dissent, isn't the fact that he's bringing this up as the vesting clause, isn't that part, isn't he agreeing with the decision? Because if he's saying he's still coming to the same outcome.
He concurs in what's called judgment only. He does not join the majority opinion.
Okay. But that isn't really a dissenting opinion.
It's concurring in part and dissenting in part.
Okay, but that part of it doesn't really dissent away from the majority.
It's what's called concurring in judgment only. Okay. So a minute ago, I forgot who said it. I think it was Marco or Walter. Talk about Curtis Wright. Remember we discussed Curtis Wright like a couple days ago even. Let's see, Yvette. In Curtis Wright, there's this great expression that the president is the sole organ for foreign affairs, right? Does the majority opinion embrace that? What do they think about that bit about the president being the sole organ for foreign affairs? What does the majority opinion say about that? No. What does the majority say about Curtis Wright? There's like a couple paragraph discussion on it. It's actually very deliberate. You have it? I'll come back. Mark?
They said, well, you're going back to how the court felt about.
How does the majority read Curtis Wright with the language that the president is the sole organ of foreign affairs? Anyone? No?
He called it unbounded power and
Yeah.
acknowledge it.
Yeah. So we have this decision from the Supreme Court. I think it was near unanimous, 34, 35. We read it last week. And they had this entire discussion from the Chief Justice Hughes that the president is sole organ over foreign affairs. Basically, he has plenary authority in matters of foreign affairs. Remember that President Roosevelt could decide which countries were involved in the Bolivian-Paraguayan war, right? Remember, he could decide to prosecute, even though Congress didn't even specify anything. The president could do this on his own. The court said he has that authority. The majority opinion here says something very fascinating. You say, listen, that's dicta, right? That's dicta, right? Yvette, what's dicta mean? Something that's not necessary to the holding, right? They say, as Elizabeth mentioned a moment ago, to give the president sole organ means he has unbounded power, an absolute definition of tyranny. Because indeed, Mark, what powers does Congress have of foreign affairs? Do they have powers?
Yes.
What are those powers?
Well, they have to approve. They have to approve ambassadors.
Good. Yeah.
They have to approve declarations of war.
Yeah.
And they control the purse strings. So if they don't agree with the president, they can.
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah, Johnny.
Well, I was going to say basically they just agree that the president has an important role in foreign affairs, but whether it's foreign or domestic, it doesn't matter. Congress is still making and enacting the laws.
Yeah.
The president is still bound to fight and enforce them.
Unless they're unconstitutional.
Right.
Right. So Janine, let me ask you this question. What happens if the president decides to say, I don't know, I am going to recognize the Republic of Texas, right? And then Congress says, screw that. We're going to declare war on Texas and pass a trade embargo that Americans can't do business with Texas. What does that mean to the president's foreign policy? President Jackson says, I will recognize the sovereign Republic of Texas. Congress says, screw that, we're declaring war on Texas, and we're going to pass a trade embargo. You can't engage in any commerce into Texas.
Well, that's undermining the president's.
Can Congress do that though? Yeah. So this is, I think, what's significant about Zivotofsky. And I think if you go back to your notes on Curtis Wright, you want to just put a little asterisk, right? For many years, us law professors suspected that Curtis Wright was dicta, right? It couldn't possibly mean what it says. It couldn't possibly mean that the president is the sole, only organ of foreign affairs, because Congress has all these powers. Here, Justice Kennedy makes the point very clearly. Even if the president recognizes engaged in that official act, Congress can go declare war in that country. Congress can block all funding for that country, and they'll block trade. And that's within Congress's powers. So, Janine, is there anything wrong with Congress undermining the president's foreign policy? Is there any constitutional problem with Congress undermining the president's foreign policy? Yeah, that's a trick question.
Well, that's one branch of the government taking over.
No. But is Congress taking over another branch? What's Congress actually doing when they declare war? Whose power is that? Whose power is it to declare war?
The president declares war?
No.
No, Congress declares war.
So when Congress declares war, are they usurping or taking anyone else's power?
No,
No. What are they doing?
they're asserting their power.
Their own power, exactly. So this is the point the majority makes. When Congress takes action such as declaring war, they're flexing their own muscle, right? They're engaging in their own power, even if it contradicts the president's foreign policy. Does everyone see this? So if I could summarize a little bit, right? In areas where this power is shared, right, there's no problem where Congress contradicts the president's foreign policy. If the president recognizes Texas and Congress declares war against it, well, that sends messages overseas, right? I mean, let's just imagine hypothetical, right? The president refuses to recognize the Jerusalem, okay, and then Congress declares war on the Palestinian territories. Amanda, would there be some unrest in if that happened? Yeah, things would blow up, no pun intended, right? So, if this happens, the Congress can contradict the president's foreign policies. But only, and this is the limitation that's stressed, where the power is concurrent, where the power is shared. What Zivotofsky stands for, though, is where it's an exclusive power, right? Sophia, what happens where it's an exclusive power? Can Congress contradict the president's foreign policy?
No.
Exactly. Exclusive and conclusive. I like that. Yes. What does that mean? It sounds great. What does that mean?
It's the president only.
And what's conclusive mean?
Means that there's nothing, I think, contradicting.
Final.
Final.
Yeah, I like that. Fine. Exclusive and conclusive, right? So the court says if the power is exclusive, the president gets a final say and Congress cannot contradict. But Sophia, are there going to be a lot of exclusive powers in the Constitution? No. And that's why this opinion is very limiting. It basically says this recognition is exclusive, but virtually everything else is shared. So the opinion does two things, right? On the one hand, it takes a hatchet to Curtis Wright. It basically cuts it off. That precedent, I don't think has much weight anymore. If you notice, the government cited it like 9 times. They mentioned that they cited like 9 times in their brief. That opinion is whoop, right? They just chopped it off. But where there's exclusive power, even in Zone 3 of Youngstown, the president can survive because it's this exclusive power the president alone has. And what so far? Yes, sir.
So the court is saying only the recognition power is?
They didn't say that, but they suggested that the number of exclusive powers is small. As opposed to Justice Thomas, right, who said vesting clause, everything. Boom, right? The majority, if you notice it, we will not address the vesting clause. You notice they wrote that very, like 1 sentence or like 2 sentences, we will not address the vesting clause because they didn't want to go there. They said we're going to limit the powers. Daryl.
So it's kind of like what's going on in Cuba.
Oh, tell me about Cuba.
Then, but if Congress doesn't authorize anyone to fund the embassy, or
well, so it's interesting. You have a question? Okay, I'll get to you in a minute. So it's interesting about Cuba, right? And for those of you who don't know, for many years, the United States refused to have an embassy in Havana. We had a mission, whatever it's called, but we recently opened up and John Kerry raised the flag in Havana, okay? Guess what? There's still sanctions. There's still embargoes. There's still things that Congress has to do. Even if the president recognizes Havana as an embassy to send ambassadors to, Congress needs to get involved to eliminate the sanctions. Even in the business with Iran, the president reached an executive agreement with Iran, and Congress still need to vote to remove certain sanctions, which they did, and it's going through the process now. Okay, so, Sophia, what's your question?
If you say that if the power exclusive is with the president alone, with the decision, so we're saying recognition is an exclusive power that he has.
That's what the court says, yes.
So the recognition, basic recognition in the statute, but in the dissent is not.
Ah, so we'll get to this in a minute, but this case is difficult because no one agrees with what's going on here, right? So the majority says that this is not an act of recognition. I'm sorry. The majority says that this is an act of recognition, right? Amanda, you're up next. Why does the majority think stamping Israel on the passport amounts to an act of recognition? Yeah. Why does the majority think that stamping Israel makes it that it's as if the United States is recognizing Israel as sovereignty over Jerusalem?
Right now, it's a situation saying, oh, Jerusalem, Israel, it's going to disturb, like what we were saying.
No, I know it's going to stir up, but what's the significance of the passport, right? Why is the passport that symbol of recognition?
Because it's ending that.
No, what's the purpose of a passport? You have a passport, right? Right. No, it's not citizenship, right? What's the purpose of a passport? You ever actually read? I should have brought my passport. Anyone ever read their passport? When you enter a foreign country, right? You're not in U.S. soil anymore, right? Can you enter any country in the world you want? And under what circumstance are visas granted?
From what I know, if we just get a U.S. citizen, our visa is given already.
Not anywhere. You can't go anywhere in the world you want, right? Naquanda, let me ask this question. Do you have a passport? Okay. If you see your passport, it says on the very first page something like, I, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, do send greetings to foreign nations that you let Naquanda into my country, right? What's the significance of the United States Secretary of State putting that endorsement in your passport? Yeah, basically, the government of the United States is vouching for her. They're saying, listen, she is one of our citizens. We have relations with you as a country, okay? And on our authority, we hope you will let her into your country, okay? So in that sense, Naquanda, what is the passport actually doing? What's the function of the passport? Is it just a travel document?
I think it's
What?
might be more, basically extending that relationship between those two countries.
Exactly. Exactly. What the majority says is a passport's a signal. It's sending a signal to the world saying, I represent the United States. I am vouching for this citizen of mine. Because of relations, please admit this person. Right? There are some countries I can't go to visit. I can't just pick up and go to Saudi Arabia, right? They won't let me in, right? There are various countries that will not admit people. Okay? So, in this case, the significance then of the passport stamp is that in an official government document circulating to the world, we are saying Jerusalem is in Israel. And the majority thinks that that is the act of recognition. That by stamping that in is sending a message to the world of what's what. Everyone get that? All right. Shiva, how does the dissent, how does Justice Scalia respond to that? He says this is not a recognition at all. How does he respond to this? Yeah, exactly. So to Scalia, what must the president do to make an official recognition?
Acceptance. Recognition of the state signifies acceptance of its position in the international community.
Yeah.
Possession of identical rights and obligations.
Very good. Is a simple passport stamp on a personal document sufficient? Right. So the majority and Justice Scalia disagree strenuously over what recognition means. Scalia says under international law, this is an official act. You have to raise a flag in Havana, right? You have to welcome an ambassador. You have to have an official government document stating your policy. A stupid little passport stamp is not sufficient. Because even if they stamped, Jared, even if they stamped, right, the passport saying Israel, would that in any way change U.S. policy?
No.
Would that affect the State Department's manuals, the State Department's references? Would anyone who knows a damn thing about international law think anything has changed?
No.
So what's the problem?
Well, he's the one. He says like it's already been done before, right? It happened.
No, but what would be the problem if anyone who understands international diplomacy understands where does the problem arise?
Or where he says it sort of like turns itself upside down.
Right.
With the people, not the.
It's basically the Heckler's veto at this point. This is what Robert says, right? Anyone who understands diplomacy will know nothing's changed, right? If you know the first thing about diplomacy, the U.S. policy hasn't changed. But it may send a message that people may perceive as if there's been a change. And maybe people will rise up on the streets, and maybe they'll get angry, and maybe some countries will blow steam and stuff. But the actual legal status is not affected. Caleb.
Is the reason for that because Jerusalem lies within the geographic boundaries of Israel? More so than anything else?
What?
We already recognize Israel, but it doesn't change.
And this is what Justice Thomas says. So this is silly because we already recognize Israel's sovereignty. Where why does this even matter? We don't. It's not based on geography. It's based on the government in charge. Right, that's what Thomas says. Yes, sir.
It goes to the point that the birth certificate was issued by Israel. Recognized the birth certificate.
Yeah. His birth certificate. We watching here now. He was born in an Israeli hospital.
No, he's born in a Jerusalem hospital. The birth certificate would actually state that it's from the city government of Jerusalem, not of Israel.
Yes, but the government of Jerusalem recognizes itself as part of Israel. So it's an Israeli hospital. And I know you're trying to play a technicality on me, but no. Thank you. Anything else?
That's just the only difference between an Israeli birth certificate.
And if he was born in Tel Aviv, it will say the government's the city of Tel Aviv. Yeah. Go for it.
Well, my question is, I mean, you don't have to show your passport again when you're entering into Jerusalem from Israel, so it seems like that. I mean, that seems like a technicality to me. I mean,
I hate to go back to it. I mean, I guess just for clarification purposes, geographically, like he just pointed out, you don't have to show your passport going back in. Is that really the only thing that causes any kind of question here about whether or not the stamp on the passport would be any kind of significance that we are recognizing?
The stamp would have absolutely zero legal significance. It would not change U.S. policy one lick. Not one bit. But the problem is how it would be perceived.
Okay.
And that's the point Robert's raised about the Heckler's veto. Right? People don't always understand the nuances of recognition. And if they see this, they'll become very upset. Okay? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, maybe we're going to get to that, but I guess what was troubling to me, and I know you keep talking about shared and not unshared powers, or the residual power, but Scalia pointed out, and I thought it was interesting, so here we're saying that executive policy preempts law. Is that what we're saying? Meaning Congress passed this act, and at the moment, at that time, it's passed, it is considered supreme law of the land. The key word there, supreme. So acts of the president, apart from treaties, he said, are not to trump the supreme law, and that's actually, I think, what we're, at the end of the day, I know we're getting into shared, unshared, non-shared, and non-shared, but when you step back and look at the whole thing, we are saying that the executive power will trump the supreme law of the land.
All right. It wasn't the congressional power to do that because it was exclusive to the president. So
says who?
Yeah, Congress can create laws.
Said the majority.
In a 5-4 decision.
Correct. Yeah.
Which said so. Yeah,
No, that's what I was going to say. That's what the court is saying. The court is saying that the law in and of itself contradicts
I hear what you're saying.
One at a time, one at a time. By the way, and if you're ever in court and you're opposing counsel, never go back and forth. Always go to the judge. And I'm not pretending to be a judge here, but it's good training, because the easy way to piss off a judge is by going back and forth, because then you lose control. So just up here, okay? Yes, ma'am.
But they're basing that based on the fact that they're saying this is a non-shared power. So again, they're going back. They're saying it's a non-shared power.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is why is it that, I mean, so that the next time around, if Congress passes another law that they think is a good law, I mean, why would they not have passed it? I mean, they represent the people. They pass the laws that obviously the people want to be represented by.
Yes.
You pass this law. The next time around, is it going to be a law that maybe more hits at home and maybe affects us more?
And this is the debate. The majority ducks this debate, right? They duck it. They don't. They reject Curtis Wright. They reject Curtis Wright saying so Oregon that there's some shared stuff. But Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia have a brawl of originalists. It's bloody, if you can imagine, right? And we discussed before, but Thomas looks at the vesting clause as saying the president wins, right? Any conflict between the executive and the Congress on matters of foreign affairs, the president wins, right? So let's go on to Thomas for a bit. Breyer, by the way, has a short, silly concurrence saying, I still believe this is a political question. There's no standing. But because precedent precludes resolving this case on political questions, whatever. So Justice Breyer does what's called a perpetual dissent. So think about this for a second, right? You vote in a case to say X, right? You're in the dissent. The exact same issue comes to the court again. How do you vote? Justice Breyer dissents again and again and again at the same point. So for example, the Second Amendment, right? Heller was a 5-4 decision saying that the Second Amendment's an individual right. When this case comes back to the court, shouldn't it be 9-0 at that point? No, the justices say, I was right and you were wrong. I'm going to keep dissenting, right? So that's called a perpetual dissent. It keeps going 5-4. Breyer says here the opposite. He says, well, since we already resolved this, I'll go along. So he doesn't perpetually dissent here. But Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia have a very vicious brawl, right? And I mean, this is open hand-to-hand combat in the Supreme Court. You don't get this often between Justice Scalia and Thomas, because they're usually on the same side, right? But where are they up to? Cameron, right? Cameron, what is the beef, right? Why does Justice Thomas take such a broad view of executive power?
He was saying that the statute in question is unconstitutional for the president's recognition power.
No, I know that. But where does Thomas get such a broad view of executive power from? How does he derive that?
I mentioned something about the Articles of Confederation.
I'm sorry?
You mentioned something about the Articles of Confederation.
Okay, what about the Articles of Confederation?
Following independence, Congress assumed control of the foreign affairs.
Ah, so look at it like this, right? Let me ask you this question, Cameron. In 1775, who had exclusive power over foreign affairs with respect to the colonies? In the year 1775, right? Who had exclusive power over foreign affairs? Who in Britain? Yeah, the guy with the crown, right? The king. After independence shook off the king, where did that power devolve to? Where did that power go? We didn't have a Congress yet. Who ratified the Declaration? What was it called? Who ratified the Declaration of Independence? What was that body called? Who remembers their American history? Caleb? The Continental Congress. He's a government teacher, right? The Continental Congress, right? And then we formed our second government. We went to the Articles of Confederation. So that power devolved from the king to the Continental Congress to the Articles of Confederation, that Congress, and who wound up with it after that? According to Justice Thomas. Who got it after the Articles? No. Where does Thomas think the executive power was deposited after the Articles? It's not Congress. Who is it? It's up here. Look up here. Where did the power over foreign affairs go from the Articles of Confederation? Who got it, according to Justice Thomas? Who does the Department of Foreign Affairs work for? The President. Yes, indeed, the very first Congress funded a Department of Foreign Affairs. And they funded a Secretary of State. They said, okay, President, go send your ministers abroad and make some connections, make it happen, right? So Justice Thomas says from the very outset, the executive power, this residual, this huge mass of authority, effectively went all the way from the King of England to the President of the United States. So, Elizabeth, how does Justice Scalia respond to this notion that Thomas frames the executive along the lines of King George III, His Royal Majesty? How does Scalia respond that you know, Thomas wants such a broad view of the executive to parallel the King of England?
Oh, that he's essentially taking back that.
Yeah, but what's Scalia's argument why that's not the case? Right? Why does Scalia think that we shouldn't be paralleling our president on the king? Why is that a wrong interpretation? What do you think? Yes, we fought a war, so we're not going to be governed by the sort of king that oppressed us as a monarch, right? Scalia says all this good stuff about Thomas signing the precedent from the King of England is backwards, upside down, because we fought a war to reject that form of government from our shores. Scalia has this great line, like, and back on this side of the Atlantic, right? He's such a good writer. I love his writing. When he's in dissent, there is no parallel. There's a book called Scalia Dissent. The entire book is just his dissents, but they read so well. You'll read a couple good ones this semester. So we have this debate, though, right? Right. So maybe Thomas is right, maybe he's wrong about the scope of the executive, right? But Thomas's other point is this: Congress lacked the power to enact this statute, right? If you read his opinion carefully, it's not based on the sole executive power, although there's a lot of discussion on that. Thomas's decision is Congress cannot enact this statute with respect to the passports. Andrew, why can Congress not enact this statute?
Would it be because it is one of it's not enumerated in the Constitution?
Good. So what are the enumerated powers that you would think allow Congress to prescribe laws concerning passports? Perhaps some of the ones up there, if I may. Highlight. Then a white, right? Yeah. Yeah, make commerce. What else?
Establish a uniform rule of naturalization.
Yeah, what else?
Declare war.
No, pushing it. There's also stuff in the 14th Amendment. We didn't get to that, so it'd be a little unfair. So Thomas says like this, look, we have these enumerated powers, right? We've discussed necessary and proper in this class. You know how this stuff works. There is no passport clause, right? There is no passport clause in the Constitution. The same way, there is no clause in the Constitution saying you can charter a federal bank, right? We discussed this in McCulloch in Maryland. There is no federal bank charter clause. So Clint, what did Chief Justice Marshall say about the establishment of a federal bank, even though there's no clause in the Constitution that permits it?
It's a means to end.
Which provision of the Constitution says that? I forgot to put it up there. What's that thing called?
Commerce Clause?
No. What's the last best hope for ultra-virus government action? What's the last best hope when you want to defend an act of Congress? What's the clause? Iris? Necessary and proper. Clint, what's necessary and proper mean?
It's all the laws that Congress can pass to enact what's stated in the Constitution.
All the laws?
Everything that's necessary and proper.
Ah, necessary and proper. What Justice Thomas says is that these are two separate inquiries. Necessary and proper. So we discussed, Taylor, we discussed in McCullough, how did Chief Justice Roberts understand necessary, right? How does he define, the example I always give is, Congress has the power to make postal services, but there's no clause saying that they can buy horses. So, of course, Congress can then use its necessary and proper powers to, buy horses and carriages and stuff, right?
You said for convenience?
Exactly, convenience, right? So Chief Justice Marshall said 200 years ago, is if, some sort of power is convenient to accomplish an enumerated goal, if buying horses is convenient to having a postal system, you can do it. But Taylor, what does Justice Thomas add with respect to proper propriety? What does Thomas add to this inquiry?
He said that for it to be proper, the law had to fall within the certain jurisdiction of Congress.
Ah, good. So what's interesting is that for like nearly 200 years, every law student thought of necessary and proper as one thing. But in the last, give or take 15 or 20 years, 20 years now, I guess, proper has been doing some work here. And what Justice Thomas says is just because something is convenient doesn't mean it's within the jurisdiction, or Taylor used, or competence of Congress. He doesn't define exactly what that means. But what he suggests is that if some sort of action by Congress intrudes on the authority of the president, that is, it's not in the Congress's jurisdiction, it's in the president's jurisdiction, the law becomes improper. In other words, the mere fact that, having passports make the naturalization power easier, right? Because if you want to know, who should be naturalizing passport? Well, usually you get a passport after you're naturalized, so it doesn't even work, right? You don't get a passport till you're a citizen. But yeah, maybe it makes their life a little bit more convenient for dual citizens, whatever, right? The mere fact that it's convenient does not make it proper, Justice Thomas writes, because it intrudes on the sphere of the executive. I understand that. But again, this is circular, because we start off with the question of, is this power exclusive or not? You see the circularity, right? This is based, again, on Justice Thomas's notion that this is only for the president to deal with foreign affairs. So with Justice Thomas, all roads lead to the same point. If the president has exclusive power over this foreign affairs, Congress cannot legislate in it. But the statute is unconstitutional because it's not a proper end to enumerated power, right? What Thomas says is, this statute is not constitutional because it's improper. It does not properly address an area in Congress's competency. You have a question? You okay? Everything right? Okay. I'll sign and shoot, yeah. Okay. Everyone with me so far? This is a preview of what we'll discuss when we discuss the Obamacare case, because the Supreme Court actually found that having a mandate to buy health insurance is convenient to having a national health system, but it is not proper because it intrudes on the sovereignty of individuals. It's actually a very delicate nuance most people don't even understand about the case. But basically, Thomas is working there. Okay, everyone, let's go with that part of Thomas's opinion. Bridget, we'll look all the way around, right? What does Justice Thomas say then about the consular reports? Not the passport. These are the reports which say if you're born in a Jerusalem hospital, the U.S. government will say you were born in an Israeli hospital. Aaron's not here. I can say that. He left the room. In fact, it was State Department censor. Go ahead.
This section 214 can be constitutionally applied to that, but not passport.
Why does Thomas think that's the case? Which enumerated power does the consular birth reports reflect that are up here? Which enumerated power?
Misses.
No, you didn't necessarily proper. Which one do you think
The
of?
naturalization?
Yes, because if you're a citizen born abroad, you need a proof that you're born to U.S. to U.S. parents. Reading the long clause, right? The pirate clause. If you were born abroad to U.S. parents, you need a birth certificate and a consular report so that you get your U.S. citizenship, right? That is what's necessary. So Thomas says that's fine. Okay. All right, everyone with me so far? Okay. Justice Scalia makes one final point that I want to dwell on. And this is a point which we'll be discussing throughout the entire class. So I apologize for going all the way around the room, but we did good progress today. State Department, I made a couple comments in your apps. Hopefully it wasn't offensive. Okay, good. Said like a true diplomat. Andrew, does Congress have to enact laws?
No.
What if there's a law the president really, really, really wants and Congress does not enact it? Does the Congress have any duty to make laws? Does the president have a duty to follow laws? Present company accepted.
Yes, under the right circumstances.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, constitutional.
So let me make this easier. Does the president have a duty to follow a constitutional law?
Yes.
Okay. The president shall take care that the laws are faithfully executed, right? The president has a duty to faithfully execute the laws. So, unless Congress acts, can the president really do anything?
We won't have anything to follow if Congress doesn't act.
Right. So here's what Scalia is getting at, right? This entire notion of exclusive versus shared powers. Michelle, does Scalia believe there are any exclusive powers in the Constitution?
No.
No, why not?
I think his whole thing is going back is that this whole exclusivity, it turns the Constitution upside down.
Good.
That's what we got away from when we were, left Great Britain, is that we're trying to get away from control, exclusivity of one power. And he thinks that we're slowly over time, he says, threatens congressional power over foreign affairs, a gradual erosion. You're leading in the same direction we started from.
Yeah. So Scalia says like this: there are no exclusive powers. Our entire Constitution is premised on ambition checking ambition, of one government holding the other government's feet to the fire. The entire notion of exclusive power is dangerous and doesn't fit in our constitutional order. Okay? The mere fact that the president wants to assert a power independently does not mean that he can. Okay? Because as the Chief Justice notes, this is the first time the Supreme Court's ever said that the president can just ignore a statute in their foreign affairs. Can just ignore it. All right, think about Youngstown, right? There, Congress withheld the power from the president. They said, you can't take these steel mills. Court said you can't do it. Right? Even in Dames and Moore v. Regan, the Iranian claims case, the court basically said, we found authority. So we're actually somewhere in the zone of twilight, or maybe in zone 1. Here they said, listen, you guys are in zone 3. Congress said no, we'll let you do it anyway. And at bottom, it's premised on a belief that the president has superior power over foreign affairs, which Congress cannot intrude. And once you start from that premise, the conclusion follows very naturally. Okay? Any questions? Yes, sir.
So Scalia would probably say, we can go to all-out war. Our country can be ravaged, but at the end of the day, we will not give up the basic rights of our Constitution.
I mean, Scalia is saying what Jackson wrote, right? That we will not interfere. I'm sorry, that we will not abdicate our role to separate the powers. Because effectively what just happened here is now the Supreme Court has just taken the power away from Congress, something which elected branches want to do and voted by a wide majority. All right? Actually, a funny story, John Kerry voted for this law. It was a voice vote in the Senate. So John Kerry, who was then a senator, voted for the law, which now he's getting sued about, that he's defending as being unconstitutional. So, funny stuff like that happens. Yes, sir.
You made a point a couple times that the president doesn't have to enforce a law if he thinks it's unconstitutional. If the Supreme Court says the law is constitutional, meaning they would fight for the other way, does the president then still have to go against his own?
Ooh. So I'll give you an example. A guy, you may know, his name was Abraham Lincoln. Okay? Wore a big hat and a beard. No mustache, though. A justice of the Supreme Court said slavery was a constitutional right, that people had actually property right and enslaved, and that Congress could not create territories that were free states. Lincoln ran on the presidency of ignoring Dred Scott. He said, I think it's wrong. Even as president, with the Supreme Court decision in the books, he disregarded the Supreme Court decision. You tell me. There's a question I posed to Mark at the beginning. Is a president required to follow a Supreme Court decision when his own oath tells him otherwise? I'm asking you. You asked the question, I'm asking it back. Do we want executive branch officials taking constitutional interpretation to their own hand in conflict with the courts?
No, then essentially there is no need for the court, right? They're going to be able to take their own.
But if he does, isn't that ambition checking ambition? I mean, if he's willing to stand up to what he thinks is an unconstitutional interpretation of it, and all he's doing is not acting, he's not acting in opposition of it, he's in fact not acting.
Okay, I'll give you an example. The governor of Arkansas standing in Central High School in Little Rock, blocking the entrance of black children. He said Brown report was wrong. Brown was wrong. The Constitution protects segregation. Plus, he was right. Brown was wrong.
In which case, you had the president act, a higher executive acting to enforce what he thought was constitutional.
Yeah.
In that example, basically what happens is the U.S. government brought in the military, right? And so if the president isn't going by what Congress says or the Supreme Court says is constitutional, what power is there to then bring the military?
I'll give you a third example. So there's a case which I didn't make you read, but I probably should have, called Ex parte merriment. And the facts actually in dispute, but pretend they are as I tell you. This is probably not what happened, but pretend they are, because I think it's probably the best rendition. During the Civil War, the U.S. military arrests a guy named Merriman. They say that he was trying to blow up bridges in Maryland, right? They throw him in a prison in Fort McHenry, where there's this big fort right outside of Baltimore. Somehow, I don't exactly know how, he sends a writ to, of all people, Roger Taney, the Chief Justice, who was also the Circuit Justice of Maryland at the time. He was a Marylander. And they said, hey, I was just arrested. I've not been given a chance to talk to a judge. Let me out. So Taney sends a message to the General Cadwalader, saying, you need to bring yourself here and explain why are you detaining Mr. Merriman? You haven't given a warrant. There's no due process, right? Nothing. The General doesn't show up. Taney sends back a message saying, you need to let him out now because you didn't give me an appearance. They don't let his process server go into the fort. They basically don't let him in the building. Taney sends another message saying, you need to send this message to Abraham Lincoln, the president, and tell him to let this guy out. Lincoln did nothing. We all talk about Dred Scott, don't we? Right? Where the president was, yeah, go ignore the law, right? Go ignore segregation, slavery, right? But in another case, Lincoln was not a saint. During the Civil War, he suspended the writ of habeas corpus. He said, I can lock you all up without any sort of process. You had a Supreme Court justice telling him, you can't do that. Let the guy go or give him a trial or something. You can't just detain him indefinitely. And Lincoln flipped him off. I mean, basically ignored him. And Lincoln said, I have the power to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. The Supreme Court said, no, that's the power for Congress alone. Lincoln said, that's not what the Constitution says. In fact, it's actually unclear. The text of the Constitution doesn't say Congress can do it alone. That's how the court has interpreted it. But again, the court does not have a monopoly in the Constitution. And if I may branch off ever so slightly, this is not directly on point, but it's relevant is what's going on in Kentucky now. And if I may, people don't understand exactly what's going on. But the mere fact that a court says something doesn't by itself mean it's law. In this case, what makes it law is that a person can call a marshal and haul a person into prison, right? But as someone who takes an oath to the Constitution, she can remain free to have her own beliefs about what the Constitution says. The only reason why her beliefs don't go very far is because a judge can throw her in jail. But there's no guarantee that that exists, right? Lincoln basically kept a guy in prison without any process because he thought, yeah, Tawny can't tell me what to do. The governor of Arkansas kept his foot in the schoolhouse doors because he didn't want to desegregate his schools. So when I asked the outside of class to Mark, I didn't mean to give him a hard time, right? I'm sorry, Mike, like you're saying, Mark. That was not the right chart, right? Does each individual actor have a duty to judge constitutionality? The answer is absolutely yes. But then it gets a lot more prickly when your interpretation conflicts with that of the court. And where is it written that the court gets the final say? Right? Where is it written that the court gets the final say? Right? Let's just make up a hypothetical, right? I don't know. The Supreme Court composition changes, and now 5 justices say Roe v. Wade was wrong, and there's no right to an abortion. Will that change the hearts and minds of millions of Americans who have been taught that, yes, there's a right to an abortion? Absolutely not. Right? Absolutely not. The mere fact that 5 people say something doesn't necessarily make it right. But as a practical example, we accept it because perhaps the alternative is wrong, of people interpreting the Constitution as they see fit and disregarding courts, because that's when things get very, very shaky. But we live in a very precarious foundation, my friends, not one of stone, but of sand. And we are always just one step away from that chaos that can result when the rule of law falters. So we don't have any solid answers here, but it's very worthwhile to think about. Any questions? Anything? I will see you on Monday. Have a great night.
Do you have a signing sheet?
Yeah. Sign it.
Yeah, we can get